Pat, every month we talk about a movie that one of us is nostalgic for, either in terms of a
Uh,
pop culture sense, or in your case, because I haven't seen a lot of these, an actual nostalgia, a feeling of warm fuzzies and looking back. This month is a little different because we're
yeah,
talking about the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination and the 50th anniversary of David Miller's executive action, a dramatization of it's kind of like Oliver Stone's JFK about 20 years
yeah,
earlier,
yeah,
um,
and half the
covering
length.
half the length, covering all the depths and the breadth and width of all the conspiracy theories that people have been talking about since it
Somewhat.
happened.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. A lot of the conspiracy theories. I'm
Yeah.
talking to the guy. You probably have encyclopedic knowledge of everything they left out. So, Pat, first of all, how you doing? Second of all, why are we talking about executive action besides the obvious?
Well, today being November 22nd, 2023, and as you mentioned, 60 years ago, I think the JFK assassination was the seminal event in American history, certainly of my generation and certainly of those generations before me. Both his generation, the World War II guys, and then, of course, later the baby boomers. So you had two significant blocks of population who were affected by this crime. And it just, in my family, my father was a Kennedy guy from day one. And the assassination really affected his outlook on the government and the world. It permeated down to me. And 50 years ago, as a 13-year-old, I stood in front of a class for the first time and did my first report on the JFK conspiracy. Uh, it was based on a 1966 Life magazine cover called A Matter of Conspiracy. And of course, Time Life was the one that bought the Zapruder film and kept it out of public view. But they would exploit it for their own ends, which was to, uh, you know, uh, I'm sorry, a matter of reasonable doubt. They did not use
Hmm.
conspiracy. A matter of reasonable doubt, which again is very fair. And they were using the Zapruder film without the headshot and frame by frame going through it, et cetera, et cetera. And that issue, that magazine, always fascinated because my dad kept anything for having to do with the Kennedy assassination. So I poured through it and did my report. And ever since then, I've been completely obsessed with it, even though as a 3-year-old, I did not remember it at all. I know some of my peers, let's call them the class of 78, did remember, but they were older. Like they were just like that 6-month period really created a memory thing. I mean, I remember my fourth birthday, for example, and that was May of 1964, but not the Kennedy assassination. So that's basically the background of why my obsession reigns. And for the first time, I visited Dallas this year, and we can talk a little about that as we talk about the movie.
Well, I mean, I kept thinking about JFK, the
Right.
Stone film. I haven't seen that movie in probably a decade or more, all the way
Okay.
through.
Mhm.
This seemed like the prototype, and I kept being amazed that something this, I guess, conspiratorial came out 10 years after the Kennedy assassination. Because I
Right.
associate that with like decades and decades of theories and dribs and drabs of information coming out.
Right.
But this stuff was known or at least theorized or conspiracized,
Right.
almost immediately, it seems, after Kennedy was whacked.
Right.
So in a lot of ways, I think that this movie has a lot of things over JFK, including length, but also I think JFK, wittingly or unwittingly, Oliver Stone took this movie perhaps as a template to make his own dramatization, which I think works well, just better in terms of a drama because there are
Right.
some performances in this movie are stellar, like Burt Lancaster, Robert Ryan, and then you get down to the guy playing the uh, Lee Harvey Oswald lookalike, Jim, and my god, I told you that I've been doing a lot of corporate training videos lately. Smacks
Yeah.
of corporate training video caliber there.
Yeah.
It's
He
really
did
bad.
He didn't exactly give a method performance there, did he?
No, he gave more of a meth head performance, I think.
Ah! You know, Burt Lancaster, of course, loved to do, like, American overview films, meaning, the seamier side of America, Sweet Smell of Success, 7 Days in May. Of course, he had that laugh. "Ha, ha, ha. Ha, ha, ha. Burt
Yeah.
Lancaster. Ha, ha, ha."
I
So
mostly
anyway,
remember him from I mostly remember Burt Lancaster from Tough Guys from
oh,
1986.
yeah, yeah, sure. His last great film. Atlantic City too, he's excellent as far as later career stuff, but he was a real star, and he was a real responsible guy. He wanted to make sure that, he was making movies of substance and consequence to America and such. Um, the irony, of course, is that Robert Ryan, uh Burt Lancaster, and Will Geer were probably three of the biggest liberals of the time. Will Geer actually had gotten blacklisted, and he was in the movie as a result of Dalton Trumbull, the screenwriter, recommending him. And of course, he went on next year to play, or even in that era, play Grandpa Walton on the Waltons. So uh, the irony of ironies that they're going to play the three corporalists, the fascists, the whoever, the oligarchs who managed the JFK assassination. And again, and I'll say one thing about this movie over the Stone movie is that there seemed to be a seriousness, a thesis, a gravitas. It's like we're going to just plainly show you how this could have happened. And I also will commend the filmmakers by saying, listen, this is our speculation based on theories that have been floating around for the last 10 years, but we're not saying it's the truth. Whereas I don't think Stone had that disclaimer in there. He just said, I'm throwing it against the wall and you decide. You decide. So
Well,
yeah,
I mean, I feel like by the time we get to Stone, it almost doesn't matter if he puts that disclaimer in there because the
right,
mythology had been so muddied, the truth and the myth had been so muddied over those 30
right,
years, whatever it had been at that point, that everyone kind of understands we're never going to know the truth. And especially in 2023, I kept thinking about it like even if someone was to come out and say with 100% certainty, we've unredacted all the files. Here's the unedited footage from all the
right,
various people who had cameras that
right,
day. Here's what
right,
really happened.
right,
Uh, Most people, or at least half the people, whatever, would not believe it because we are in a post-truth era of deep fakes
right,
and fake
right.
news and all this other stuff.
Well, I also say too that I think basically the trail was made cold on purpose. I
Yeah,
mean, they first of all, you had an incompetent Dallas Police Department. Then you had FBI and infiltration almost immediately, and they muddied the waters even more. And of course, during the Warren Commission report, the CIA and the FBI would not cooperate, nor would they turn over any kind of vital information to the very agency that the United States had set up to make sure that everything. So, and also too, it was a political organization, the Warren Commission. Um, LBJ did not want the Warren Commission overseeing his inauguration as the duly elected president. I mean, he went through the campaign and everything, but this was like, I'm doing something about this. And that's how he campaigned about. And then the report came out September of 1964, which is extraordinary when you think about it. They didn't even use a whole year to investigate. They did it in 10 months. Witnesses, everything. This is a 12-volume behemoth, which was another thing I think. They tried to bureaucratize the information regarding the Kennedy assassination, thinking no one would ever read, 12 volumes of, you know, depositions and evidence. Well, they started almost right away. And the two guys who inspired the story for this, Mark Lane and David Reed, I think was the other guy, they were both conspiracy theorists. Mark Lane especially, he made his name on being a Kennedy conspiratist. And he was dogged in his pursuit of getting alternative witnesses, getting witnesses that appeared before the Warren Commission, but some of their stuff was redacted because it didn't go with the theory that Oswald was the single shooter. And these are all legitimate witnesses that the Warren Commission simply would not listen to because it didn't follow their preordained, um, result. So a lot of stuff going on there. Yeah.
Right. I mean, and this sort of ties into we're going to jump all around here.
Yes.
But towards the I'm not even going to put up the spoiler banner because I mean, this
No.
movie is about people
No.
planning the JFK assassination, and
Yes.
we all know how it
Yes.
ended up.
Yes.
Although I do appreciate that, again, this is kind of the 2023 lens. Uh, they probably people had not seen, I imagine, a dramatization to this degree and using these techniques back in 1973. So to
Right.
me, I've seen versions of this on TV and movies like ad nauseum in the ensuing
Yes.
decades, but I can imagine 73 was pretty thrilling.
Well,
Um,
just yeah. Well, we'll just type in JFK assassination right now, and you'll be there for 5 days without sleeping. And here, you had the books, of course, and then boom, we have a movie telling us this could possibly be what happened. So,
And it's very convincing because they have reenactments,
mhm.
through with the kind of the black and white lens fused pretty seamlessly with the archival footage. I mean, there was stuff in here that I hadn't seen, like one of Oswald's sort of press corps, interviews when he was being transferred
Oh,
from one place to another,
wow.
basically talking about like no one's, they told me that I'm being accused of assassinating the president, I guess, but no one's charged me with anything. I have no idea what's
Right,
going on.
right.
But no, what I meant to get at is towards the end, after the assassination, they have, I guess I'm not sure, the Dallas chief of police, somebody is sitting in a room with reporters and he's saying, yep, we interrogated Oswald 3 times. And someone says, well, how long did that last? And like, I don't know how long the last one went, so I can't really tell you that. He said,
Right.
well, is there a recording of it? No. Is there a stenographer's record we can look at? No. Did anybody how do you know what was said? It's like, well, people talk.
Well,
But
and go ahead.
what I was
Sorry,
going to say,
finish your point.
getting back to this idea of, how could they put together this gargantuan report in the course of a year? I mean, part of me was just wondering how much this stuff was written beforehand.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you were like want to get really conspiratorial, like it's amazing they put all this together. Well, that's because it was just ready to go.
Well, it's been proven that one of the lead lawyers or Congress people came in with a book about single gunmen, single wacky gunmen, and put it in front of everybody and said, here's some reading for you in case. I think to a person, the Warren Commission, the lead counsels on them, which include Gerald Ford and Hale Boggs, the father of Cokie Roberts, who was later who later was lost in a plane in Alaska in very suspicious circumstances.
Well, we'll talk
Um,
about that too. Yeah.
yes, yes, yes. But to go back to the handling, the Dallas police handling of Oswald, um, again, I believe that the Fed said, "Don't take anything down what he says," because, um, it could be used against in the trial, I don't know, whatever the reasoning or whatever they knew that Ruby, it was already set up to kill him, so you want to take any testimony, believe me, we'll take care of that. So, but it is suspicious, and if you go in, they do have some sort of vague, uh, th somebody put together everything Oswald said from November 22nd to the day he was, killed, and some of it has to do with the deposition. So, I mean, again, it's just, the trail was meant to be cold.
Yeah, and that's particularly. We'll just jump right to the end because there's so much to talk about. I don't want to lose any of these threads, but
Right.
there is a It's got one of the most chilling double whammies of an ending that I've ever seen. It ends as so many of these scenes do with a bunch of, powerful men hanging out in like a parlor, probably drinking scotch, and Robert Ryan is, I think he's playing pool, and he gets a phone call, and he says, "Our Mr. Farrington is dead, heart
Burt
attack,
Lancaster.
at Parkland Hospital," which is where all this stuff went down. And this is almost in the immediate aftermath of the assassination. Yeah. So yes, to your point, the kind of one of the head conspirators, one of the head people who helped orchestrate this entire thing, played by Burt Lancaster, dies immediately after the job is done.
At
And when
Parkland.
he meant, yeah, but what he says that he hits the he's playing pool, he hits the cue, it's got that nice crack, and it cuts right to black. And then we fade into a couple of photographs of two of the two of the henchmen in this whole operation, saying how they died under mysterious circumstances. And then we pull out and we see an entire, like, wall almost of black and white images with red text of all the different people, as we're led to believe, who were involved in this at every level of the conspiracy, who
Right,
helped execute it, dying
right.
under mysterious circumstances. And then we get a title card saying that they all died within 3 years of each other. And the odds of this, someone calculated, were 100,000 trillion to one. And then we get our final scrolling end credits, and I'm just sitting there going, wow.
Yeah. That
Yep.
that's always been one of the sticking points. Richard Belzer, of all people, were really fascinated with
Oh, yeah.
this and wrote an entire book of the witness problem, as it were. And there are some pretty sticky type murders or circumstances, that accidents and all that stuff, that says, come on, that can't be just circumstantial. There has to be some sort of pursuit or, you know, situational aspects. I mean, two of them, while they were going to be hauled up against the tribunal again, from the first film, from JFK rather, the character of David Ferry, who was played by oh God, I can't, my mind. Anyway, David Ferry was, you know, mysteriously killed before he could get up against, in the Clay Shaw trial, that JFK was based on. Um, and then what was the second point? Oh, I think Oswald's handler was a guy named George Borchardt. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but he was going to go up against the 1979 assassinations board, and he committed suicide before he went up there. So, two very main people who could have answered a lot of questions, you know, interestingly get whacked, or whack themselves, if you will, before they are to sit against the tribunal. So it was Jim Garrison, by the way, who played by
Right. That
Kevin
was
Costner.
Costner. Right.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
we haven't spent a lot of time we've been talking around the movie, I think, but I
right.
think that a lot of that is because it really is a lot of people in rooms talking to each other.
Yeah,
The one thing that kind of bugged me is I felt like I was reading a report instead of watching a movie,
yeah,
because most of the dialogue in
I
this
agree.
movie was facts, statistics, everything being rattled off between two people,
Yeah,
as if those people wouldn't know that information already.
right,
Um,
right.
my one the one example, I have was they they kept mentioning this, and of course, I'm a child at heart, a lascivious teenage boy, when they were talking about the type of rifle. It was the Mannlicher.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm a child,
Car
but one of the
Carcano, the Mannlicher Carcano, which was an Italian gun that was produced during World War II.
right, but this is the line.
Yeah,
The rifle, someone says, "Jesus, the Italians stopped making this in 1941." That's 22 years ago. You
Yeah.
know, just dialogue like that, you
Oh,
know, people either should know it or they already know it. Why are they reiterating these facts to each other? It was just clunky, and I
it
felt
w
that,
yeah.
it was it's fascinating, but I'd rather read this in an article than watch it dramatized.
Now, you know he bought that gun through a Chicago concern. Did you know that?
No. Wait,
It
maybe. I My knowledge of JFK assassination is mostly a jumble of things I've seen on movies and TV, so
Sure.
I don't have all my facts straight or
Well,
even right.
there was uh, a company called the Klein Sporting Goods Company, and believe it or not, they were on West Washington Street, like probably a nice baseball throw from City Hall, and um, and he apparently he did it under a assumed name, Oswald, but everything that was so neatly tied up as far as the evidence chain, and really no one would pursue Klein, who apparently was a fairly big Chicagoan who lived in a hotel. And there's a great piece of video um, uh, with the early Channel 7 news in Chicago in front of the hotel where Klein was staying, which is, that's what you did. That's the only news you have. Uh, s- so, unfortunately, Mr. Klein would not come out and comment. Of course, he's not going to. But
You know,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, one of the things I wanna get your read on this because this is how my modern movie brain works. There's a scene where Burt Lancaster's Farrington it's really funny. He sits down, he's like in a baseball cap and almost like a hunting jacket in a diner. He meets up with Ed Lauder's
So
character,
bad.
and he's the main point person for one of the teams that is practicing the assassination. I mean, that stuff is fascinating, where they're out in the desert,
Mhm.
up on different vantage points, getting a triple, like a cross section in order to take out Kennedy. But they meet
Yep.
up for sort of a debrief in a diner, and Lancaster's being very coy. This is all very need to know. But then
Right.
he mentions what the 3 gunmen are going to receive in exchange for their service. It's like $25,000 in a Swiss bank account, plus immediate travel out of the country, new identities, 25 grand a year for the next 5 years, and at the end of 5 years, $100,000 or something like that. They're gonna be set up. And at that point, Ed Lauder's character says, "Well, Jesus, you just told me who we're going to assassinate." In my
Yeah.
in my mind, that's the trigger for Burt Lancaster to put in a call and say, "Okay, now we gotta get rid of this guy."
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But
But,
he's with it through and through until
yeah,
to
going
the end,
back to
yeah.
your point about the structure of the film, this is the 3rd time I've seen it. I saw it almost as a contemporary on a screening in the '70s in college, and I didn't have the knowledge that I had now, so I was quite frankly bored with it. And then I saw it recently again, I would say within the last 5 years, and I was captivated because I knew more. But what struck me about seeing it now, or for the 3rd time, is the type of film where you forget virtually everything that happens once you move on a couple weeks because of the way it's structured. There's nothing really even though the information is compelling, the structure of it is not compelling enough to make it at all interesting to a layperson, I would think. I don't know how you felt about that.
I'm there with you. As I mentioned, between the uneven acting and literally there's a scene where a guy is just reading a file out of a manila folder.
Yeah,
You can't get more bland than that, and a lot of the information I just kind of glossed over. I'm like, "Okay, when are we gonna get to the assassination?" Even the assassination buildup, I was
right.
pretty bored by because, like, yes, they're going into a
Yeah,
I imagine this is historically accurate, but, I don't the book depository, you get up there and there's hundreds of white boxes, and they're all just labeled books. Like like,
that's not that is completely inaccurate. There is a lot of non-accurate problematics in this. They just didn't care about the continuity of, what you call anachronism, If they were filming, there would be like a car in back that was from 1972, and they're like, you know. So this was set in 1963. There's no atmosphere at the end. You know, of course, budgetary concerns. They couldn't set up the whole thing, and I don't think they could really um, shoot in the same area. They could go around the buildings and go up and
Sure.
down them, but they couldn't set up the day, if you will. And
Well,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, the actual assassination from the point where the motorcade is coming, making its way
Right.
around the streets. I also thought of this is the real Nightmare on Elm Street because I hadn't put that
Ah!
connection together that where he
Ah!
gets shot. Yeah. Again, I'm a teenage boy at heart, but no, I thought the actual assassination was really done very well because you get
Yes,
all the
I did
classic
too.
kind of close ups of Kennedy and Jackie and all
Right.
that. The people taking aim, you really get a sense of where all these people were to get him in that crossfire,
Right.
and it's horrifying, especially because the sound drops out. It's very much, David Miller and his editor, they have a very much a forward-thinking sensibility to the way I feel like people would treat this material today. It's very artistic, for lack of a better word, instead of
Mhm.
just straightforward of like crowds screaming and gunshots and everything. It's
Right.
chilling.
Well, that's what you do when you can't recreate. You know, you create a offbeat. The motorcade itself, and I didn't go frame by frame through it, but to me, the shade of Jackie's suit is off. You know, a lot of things are off in that, but the way that, like you said, they edited it together, it had such an impact because when you see it earlier, you're seeing them the training and how they're hitting the target, quote unquote, um, and yet and it's successful later based on what the training they did. Right?
And one of the
There was
gunmen, did you pick up, did you recognize who one of the gunmen was?
oh yeah, Dick Miller.
Dick Miller, yes.
I asked
Which is strange.
when he
I don't
was
think he Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no when he was here for his documentary during the Critics Fest. I don't know what 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I asked him about executive action. So obviously, I'd seen it within the last 10 years rather than the last 5.
What did he say about it? Because I don't think he actually has any lines. At the very end, when he's on the plane, the guy next to him says something to him, and he just
Right.
kinda says, "Eh."
Well, I wanted to say too, I asked Miller again, since you guys were on a movie about the JFK assassination, a scant 10 years after it happened, what was the atmosphere? What was the conversation about? He said, "Oh my God, everybody talking their theories." But he said what was fascinating about working on the film was that you were actually playing out the conspiracy theories he'd been hearing for the past, 10 years. So he said playing those out really gave you a sense and a feel of it. So whenever I hit an actor who has been part of a JFK type project, I always ask him about it. That's just my policy. And I think Gary Oldman gave me name drop. Gary Oldman gave me the best answer because he played Lee Harvey in JFK, and he goes, "I sat in that window for 6 hours, and I'm telling you right now, no way, no way." That's what he said. That's what Jim
Gary
Gordon said.
Oldman. That's a great get. That must have been a hell of an interview.
Oh,
Um,
man, I don't know how. It just that was the height of, people coming in. They don't do that anymore. We're not never gonna see that again because Zoom is so much more convenient. "Oh, do you wanna join a virtual press conference?" "No. No, I wanna talk to them one-on-one. If you can't get them to me one-on-one, I'm not gonna waste my time," you know?
yeah.
So, anyway.
Well, hey,
So,
never say
yeah, I
never.
mean huh?
Never say never. Maybe
Oh,
maybe the
yeah,
good old days
they're
will come
still
back.
gonna come live because they're gonna get the punch if they come live, but it's not gonna be as consistent as it once was. Anyway,
Yeah.
we're off on a tangent. Um, so so yeah, the biggest and there's I did like Robert Ryan when he quoted Richard III. Did you notice that? I looked it
Yes.
up. It's not that I know Shakespeare well enough, but and that small bottle of the barren earth which serves as paste to cover our bones. For God's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. I love that. That was
That it
the highlight of the movie for me.
it was very much I think this would be a good companion piece to Oppenheimer, honestly, because this very much has that feeling of I am become death, destroyer of worlds. Like
Right,
these
right,
powerful men. That what I liked about the lead performances, the conspirators, and not so much the people doing the groundwork because they're inherently uninteresting and not as good as actors, I guess,
right,
was none of them they didn't seem to relish what they were doing. This isn't like, "Oh, we're going to get all this power and this money, and it's gonna be great." They all seemed like they were doing a duty, probably serving other people or other
yeah,
causes
yeah,
that aren't even mentioned or shown in the film, because it's all
right,
very matter of fact. They
right,
almost seem burdened and saddened by it. Um,
right.
Not that they had necessarily anything against Kennedy personally. Okay, maybe a couple of them did, but
Right.
there's like, "Yeah, we just gotta kill this guy. That's the job."
Well, interestingly enough too, that there's a line to say, "Do we have anything personally on him that we can exploit in the '64 election?" I'm like, "Well, he stooped Marilyn Monroe, didn't you couldn't undercover that? You couldn't uncover that his checkered past, with, his various affairs and everything. It was a much more moral country back then. Did they believe that people wouldn't believe it? Because I know that the Republicans were planning something like that. Also, he had very, very ill health, even though he looked like he was Mr. Vitality. He had like Addison's disease and he had a horrible back injury and he was just kind of hanging on by a thread. A big, big like had a doctor that would shoot him with a stimulant to get him out there sometimes because he just simply had ill health. Now, speaking of the background actors, there was one that fascinated me, and I had to look him up. And his name was Richard Hurst. He played the used car salesman that the fake Oswald had to get riled up. So this guy, I saw him on thousands of shows
Really?
during the '70s, right. So I looked him up, and the same year he did, Executive Action, he did The Bob Newhart Show, Love American Style, Kung Fu, Gunsmoke, Kojak, and a very famous TV movie at the time, The Girl with Something Extra. You're talking that's like the biggest league of big leagues right there in that list, and that was just 1973. So I'm
Pat,
like, "Oh, good on you, Dick Hirsch."
I'm afraid to ask what that something is extra is on that girl.
It's
What did you
ESP. It's ESP. Come
Oh,
on, you
okay.
dirty-minded son of a bitch.
I'm just wondering. But no, I mean, that's the yeah, like, that was the other thing that was distracting. This might have been historically accurate, but, it's a fascinating idea that this Jim guy that the conspirators essentially hire because he looks enough like Oswald that they can plant him around Dallas to show up places, stirring
Yeah,
up trouble so that witnesses can later say, "Oh, that's the guy you think shot Kennedy? Well, he was acting all crazy in my car dealership. He was in
right,
the gun shop acting very
right.
interested in getting this rifle." It's fascinating, but just the performance of it is like, "I'm Lee Harvey Oswald."
Damn it.
Like, remember that name in case that ever becomes important for some reason. Like, you're
Well, they
overdoing it,
do
pal.
mention one of the big mysteries of Oswald happened in September of 1963, where he took a trip to Mexico City to either coordinate with Russian agents there or Cuban agents or et cetera, et cetera. And the CIA was tailing him, but everything disappeared. How about that? Oh, and there were rumors that there was a false Oswald down there stirring up the hornet's nest. So come on, this guy, which again the movie nicely summarizes, as a very young guy, starting from 17 to 24 when he allegedly iced JFK. In that 7 years, he did more than most people do in a lifetime, as far as travel, uh, learning a new language. Yeah, stupid a Russian girl. It's just like going back and forth from the U.S. with with absolutely no blowback. Oh
Well,
yeah, here's your passport back. Good luck, Lee. And here's $500 to start your new life.
right. I mean, that's the thing, and especially back in the early, the late 50s, early 60s when he was doing all this, the world was a much bigger place. It's
Yep,
not like,
right.
someone had to be funding this. So, how does he know where to go and who to meet? I mean, he seemed very well connected, but, who knows? I want to
I
wrap up
also
here,
believe it
but
was an easier place to get around it. I mean, you can explain a lot of that passport stuff. As you recall, what was that? Catch Me If You Can.
oh
That guy
yeah,
would just go all over the place because the paper trail was 5 days behind him.
because it
So
was
that,
actual
you
paper,
know,
yes.
yeah, it was actual paper, exactly.
But two things before as we kind of wind down.
Yes,
I mean, that's the one of the things this movie put into perspective is this sort of idea that this modern idea that we're almost at the end of history, that conspiracies and all that
right,
stuff,
right.
you bring it up to a certain point, almost like a date, and then everything afterwards is just crazy. Whereas,
That's a good
you just
point.
wait 50 years and perhaps a lot of the stuff that people suppose about any kind of world events now is going to come out and be like, well, people thought other folks were crazy, but it's crazy to think that conspiracies stopped on, say, 9/11, and even
What
that's a question.
Well, they say history is written by the winners. Well, the history of the JFK assassination, the first draft was the press. They fell on their asses after that. They completely moved to the government version of it. And then, of course, the second draft was the Warren Report, and history written by the winners. We're going to eliminate any talk of any other witnesses except for the ones that said it was a lone gunman. So that's you want to talk about an example of that old aphorism. There it is, and that's why. But it was such a public, horrid crime that they couldn't quell what happened afterward. In fact, they fueled it. You know, and
Well, and
again,
that's
the media sat on their asses. There were 6 newspapers in each town, and nobody thought to send an investigative reporter. No,
well, but you also have to look at the collusion between the government and the press. I mean, that's come out in the last, several decades.
yeah.
You know,
Well, it's also a patriarchy. I hate to use that term, but when men rule the roost and men rule the roost of the media company, and it's all like uh, uh, the old boys club. Yep, oh, we'll keep that under wraps. Don't you worry. Calls down to the editor. Kill that story about JFK. There was an independent press person. Have you ever heard of the name Dorothy Kilgallen?
no, I don't think so.
She was a she was a celebrity journalist. She did like Broadway columns, but she was also a very good reporter. And her bio is called "The Reporter Who Knew Too Much." And
Hmm.
she was obsessed with the JFK assassination because she knew him, and and she was an independent, so she made a big wad of cash on To Tell the Truth because she was a panelist, and so she was a woman, she had status, and she had her own independent income. So they couldn't get after her in the ways the patriarchy gets after people, which is to bribe them or, or put them in the old boys club. They couldn't do that. So what she did is went after Ruby, and she became a confidant of Jack Ruby, and she was going to go to New Orleans when, guess what? She ends up in her guest room, full makeup on, uh, dead from an overdose of barbiturates. They did a Marilyn Monroe on her. They just inserted the blade, and that was it. And so all her files were missing from her place.
Right. I mean,
I'm not again, these are
no, I
facts, folks.
no,
These are
I
not,
understand.
it's not the
I just
hysterical rant of an old
no, I
man.
it's more that I guess I just take issue with the word patriarchy in this context because
Mm,
yes, it's a historical fact that men were running the show, but I I struggle to think what is innately different about women who would be in those positions of power just to say, "Oh, women would never do this," because I think
It's
that's
not
a
it's
bit
not the it's
sexist.
well, it's power, all right?
Right, but
How
that
how
that you
how is
don't have
how
to.
is how does power get generated? It gets generated over generations and generations of the same people doing the
Right.
same thing. When I use the term patriarchy, I'm saying men. Yeah, and
Right, but I
women
guess
and people of color were subservient. So, who's to say if an African American was writing things back then, what would it have been different? If a woman had been writing things, would it have been different? Power corrupts, absolutely.
right, but
Sure.
I
But
guess I just don't understand why drag, like, the male sex into this conversation if the issue
I'm
is
not
power
dragging the
would.
male sex, I'm dragging the patriarchy, which is
But
a
the patriarchy is
overwhelming.
the patriarchy is the idea of a male-centric dominating force, which
Yes.
by coincidence of history, if you wanna call it is.
Coincidence of history.
Right, because here's the thing, if we can agree that men, women, minorities, whites, everybody is susceptible to the corrupting influences of power, as we can look all over the globe and say that, there are people of different races and whatever who've had power and abused it, then why draw the patriarchy is a buzzword, and I get it. But I'm just trying to it's just an odd word to me to bring out in this particular instance because we're not talking about something that necessarily has to do with gender.
I brought it up in the sense of Dorothy Kilgallen. Uh, Given to put that time in a historical place. I'm saying that there was a much more of an old boys club when everybody in the position of power looked and acted the same. And when I use the term patriarchy, I'm talking about an essence of power rather than the gender itself. Because everybody's influenced by their own bodily functions having to do with their gender. So I'm talking about the patriarchy as a power definition. And if you look at the term patriarchy now and the way that they're using it, it's about the power definition. Hashtag me too. Black Lives Matter. It's all about how power is using itself against oppressed classes. So if it were the woman in charge and they develop a power base and oppress people, then I'd say, yeah, the matriarchy was forcing that hand back then. I'm using it as a term of power.
Yeah, I mean, I get where you're coming from. I just don't happen to
Okay.
agree.
I
But
I I
anyway,
I got it. I got it.
I just wanna
That's
ask
what I
you.
like about you because we can have a difference of opinion, but I don't think I respect where it's coming from. I don't disagree with your thesis about it. I just, you know, wonder
No, and
why
that's
people won't look at it that way. They get hung up on man woman. They don't. It's not that. It's just generations of the same people
well,
generating the
but
same type of power base.
right, but I think, and this is a whole other topic, but I think
Yeah.
definitions are important. So, when you introduce something that is gendered or racially, tinged into a situation that doesn't necessarily warrant it, I mean, it could by a certain definition. It's kind of like the idea of racism used to be, discriminating against someone because of their race. Now they've injected this thing in the last 5 years of racism means prejudice plus power, which some people might say is cheating
Well,
because it implies that
again, I
certain
think
races cannot be
you're
prejudiced against. I
okay.
I didn't redefine anything. I'm talking about the word as redefined in my lifetime
Hmm.
to fit, I think, a certain, cultural agenda, which,
Well,
I ascribe to.
you're allowing that definition to define it. So if
No,
you're,
I'm
I
reacting to a cultural redefinition of a word that I've understood for 46, 41 years
well,
being changed.
you can reject it though.
I can reject it personally, but culturally, the
Hmm.
conversation has shifted to this,
Interesting.
to the point where it's like, well, white people are definitely inherently racist, you might say,
No,
but you
I
can't
don't say
be.
that.
I'm talking about the wider cultural conversation and the
Hmm.
idea that there are certain minorities who cannot be racist against white people because whites have inherent power over certain structures, which if you take racism a definition of prejudice plus power, it doesn't really work. The door swings one way, and I think that's unfair and antithetical to the civil rights struggle. Anyway, we have a minute left, Pat. I want to ask you about this.
Well,
Out of all the
let me just
conspiracy,
go ahead.
go ahead.
I just want to quickly sum up my trip to Dallas, and if you
Oh,
ever want to
yes,
go
yes.
down to Dallas, well, first we'll start with the sixth floor museum, which they've completely redone the sixth floor where the sniper's nest was into a comprehensive museum about the assassination. Good for people who don't know anything about it, and good for people who are experts on it, like I am. And then the second thing I'll say about it, because I was only staying a block away from Dealey Plaza, which was ideal for me, is that a lot of the infrastructure having to do with the assassination is still there and still intact, unbelievably so. Uh, Near me, where Dealey Plaza, of course, looks like it stepped out that day. And then you go to the Greyhound station where Oswald got a cab, it's exactly the same. You go up to the boarding house where he was staying, exactly the same. You go to the intersection where he shot the cop, allegedly, exactly the same. And you go to the theater where he was captured, the Texas Theater, exactly the same. Now, they either did that intentionally or it's just a weird coincidence of history. So that's all I'll say about my Dallas trip. But what were you going to ask about conspiracies?
My last question.
Mhm.
Out of all the conspiracies, and I need like a concise answer because I really the clock
Good
is my
luck.
enemy. Um, what is your favorite JFK conspiracy theory, if you have one?
Okay. My favorite theory is that he was too popular to live, meaning that his policies, in conjunction with his popularity, was too hard to defeat. And whatever you want, I'll call it the oligarchy rather than the patriarchy. The oligarchy, who wanted to really control the world, suddenly had this pinko guy talking about peace, talking about equality of the races, which they brought up in the movie.
Yeah.
Um, and no, he cannot go on. We have a war industry to fund. We have this and that and the other thing. Geopolitics are such that this kind of guy, who is very not only popular in the US, he was revered in Britain. I mean, he was practically a god there. He was practically a god in West Germany. Khrushchev loved him. I mean, he just had a personality that people loved, and his speeches are amazing. They're nuanced and intellectual and forward thinking. No more forward thinking. He's got to be iced. And I
Which
think
I mean,
go ahead.
he was almost a 20th century Christ figure in
Well,
in
in a
certain ways.
sense, yeah.
Yes,
But
kind of coming out
the
and speaking
result of
against the
his
common wisdom. Yeah. Hmm.
right, and but the result of his death was not what happened. It wasn't the same as Christ,
Well,
obviously.
of course, that'd be a
Yeah.
bit weird.
Well,
Anyway,
maybe 1,000 years from now, who knows? But the point is, so I think it was a conflagration between extremists in the government and the oligarchy, which I believe the film did a good job of explaining, basically. And this was again, it was a work of fiction, so we don't know exactly what happened, but I think theoretically Mark Lane wanted to take his name off the project because he said there was not enough CIA in it. And I
well,
tend to agree because they're the ones that will not redact things that are 60 years old, calling them national security. Well, we live in a different era, my friends. And
well,
if
that's
you yeah,
this is a conversation for when we talk about JFK with by Oliver Stone.
yeah,
I have to go, but yes, Pat McDonald of HollywoodChicago.com. Pat, the Uber critic. Thank you so much for talking about a subject you're very passionate about. I'm becoming
yes,
passionate about because more I learn, the crazier things get. But
yeah.
yeah, folks, 60
And and
years. Wow.
and I want to thank you for indulging this passion on this very day. It's really historical for me to be here today, November 22nd, 2023, 60 years after the event, talking about this very subject, which is near and dear, obviously.
Yes.
Blessings.
All right. Blessings, sir. All right. Take care.